he, Maharaj Rahuguna, cha also, api, indeed, Pandaveya, O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, Sindhu Sovira Pati, the king of the states known as Sindhu and Sovira, Tattva Jigyasayam, in the matter of inquiring about absolute truth. Samyak Shradaya, by faith consisting of complete control of the senses and the mind. Adikrita Adhikara, who attained the proper qualification. Tat, that. Hridaya Granti, the knot of false conceptions within the heart. Mochanam, which eradicates. Vijavacha, the words of the Brahmana. Jadabarat. Ashrutya, hearing. Bahu Yoga Grantha Samatam, approved by all yogic processes and their scriptures. Tvaraya, very hastily. Havaruya, getting down from the palanquin. Shirasa, by his head. Padamulam, had the lotus feet. Pashta, falling down flat to offer obeisances. Kshimapayan, obtaining pardon for his offence. Vigatanri Padeva Samaya, giving up the false pride of being the king and the worshipable. Vacha said. Translation. Sukadeva Goswami continued, O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhu and Sovira states, Maharaj Rahugna had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jad Bharat that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process and which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jad Bharat in such a way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmin. He then prayed as follows. Okay, please repeat. Sukadeva Goswami continued. O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhus and Sovira states, Maharaj Rahuguna, had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jad Bharat that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process and which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jad Bharat. That way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmana. He then prayed as follows. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In Bhagavad Gita 4.2, Lord Krishna says, Evam parampara praptam imam raja shio vidu satalneha mahata yoganasta parantapa This supreme science was thus received through the chain of the cyclic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Through the cyclic succession, the royal order was on the same platform as great saintly persons, Raj Rishis. Formerly, they could understand the philosophy of life and knew how to train the citizens to come to the same standard. In other words, they knew how to deliver the citizens from the entanglement of birth and death. When Maharaj Dasarat ruled Ayodhya, the great sage Vishwamitra once came to him to take away Lord Ramachandra and Lakshman to the forest to kill a demon. When the saintly person Vishwamitra came to the court of Maharaj Dasarat, the king, in order to receive the saintly persons, asked him, "I hishtam yatat punarjanma jayaya." He asked the sage whether everything was going on well in his endeavour to conquer the repetition of birth and death. The whole process of Vedic civilization is based on this point. We must know how to conquer the repetition of birth and death. Maharaj Rahugana also knew the purpose of life, therefore when Jad Bharat put the philosophy of life before him, he immediately appreciated it. This is the foundation of Vedic society. Learned scholars, Brahmins, saintly persons and sages who were fully aware of the Vedic purpose advised the royal order how to benefit the general masses, and by their cooperation the general masses were benefited. Therefore everything was successful. Maharaj Rahugana attained this perfection of understanding the value of human life. Therefore he regretted his insulting words to Jad Bharat, and he immediately descended from his palanquin and fell down at the lotus feet of Jad Bharat in order to be excused and to hear from him further about the values of life known as Brahma Jigyasa, inquiry into the absolute truth. At the present moment, high government officials are ignorant of the values of life, and when saintly persons endeavour to broadcast the Vedic knowledge, the so-called executives do not offer their respectful obeisances, but try to obstruct the spiritual propaganda. Thus one can say that the former kingly government was like heaven, and that the present government is like hell. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurumilitamina Tasmai Shigurave Namaha Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Garim Yakripatamaham Vande Shigarim Dinataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Sukadeva Goswami continued. O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhu and Savira states, Maharaj Rahugana had great faith in his discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jad Bharat that philosophical presentation, which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process, and which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jad Bharat in such a way that he might be excused for insulting words against the great Brahmin. He then prayed as follows. So Prabhupada is making the point here that the Raja Rishis, so Raja means king and Rishi means sage. These kings weren't normal kings. According to the description of the daily schedule of a king, then it's very austere. They rise very early. The first thing they do is to go to the temple, just like we do here. They actually live like a sadhu practically. They don't sleep much. And they have a very regulated lifestyle, and they're not just some kind of a disempowered PR figurehead, which is sometimes what happens nowadays, where they have a certain amount of power but they never use it for fear of losing popularity, so they don't always take the step or have the gumption to take the step to do the right thing. And neither do they know what is right and what is wrong. According to Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, the demoniac know not what is to be done and what is not to be done. So we're not pointing the finger at anyone in particular, but according to the Vedic understanding of life, then human life is different from animal life. Sometimes we see people propagating humans are just animals, they're just more civilized or intelligent animals, but actually you wonder sometimes when you see the behaviour of humans, you think animals don't do things like this. Even the worst of animals, they don't do this. Certain things which they don't do. So we sometimes humans misuse their intelligence. If they have some philosophy or conclusion that actually there is no consequences and they can do what they want without any payback, then they can do anything as long as they don't get caught. If they don't care about anybody, then they can do anything. They can do anything to other people, to other living entities, to the planet. As long as they get what they want here and now, that's what matters to them. So this is called asura, or ungodly. And it's called ungodly because those who believe in, or those who understand that there is a supreme proprietor and a supreme controller, they understand that actually nirmama, nothing is mine. So if nothing is mine, sometimes the hippies had this philosophy that nothing belongs to anybody, so they just take what they want. And this way actually, they still don't recognise who is the supreme proprietor. So everything was here before we came along, and it'll be here when we've gone, but for a short period of time we think, this is mine, or that's near me, I'll just grab that, that's mine. We put our stamp on it. So we fortify our I, me and mine illusion, and at the end of it all, we leave it all behind for perhaps our friends or family who we consider ours. This is mine, this is my brother, sister, daughter, son, father, mother, friend. But these relationships are temporary, just like in the ocean, sometimes some pieces of seaweed come together for some time and then the waves separate them, never to connect again. So this is the fact of life, that we're all innumerable living entities living on even this just one planet, which speak of so many planets existing. It would be insane to consider that there's no life on any other planets. Even according to the law of probability, then it would have to. What to speak of what the Vedic scriptures say. So, when the saintly kings, part of their daily activities was to hear from the Brahmin advisors. The Brahmins in those days were Brahmins according to qualification. So there's 4 Brahminical principles. Can anyone name any of those? Peacefulness. Those four, they specifically relate to the 4 religious pillars as well.
Truthfulness, austerity,
yeah. So these other ones which Raghunath was referring to are qualities, and these 4 are the principles. So truthfulness, mercy, cleanliness and austerity. So the Brahmins would follow these and they wouldn't be deviated from this. And so in this way they were situated in the truth. And Brahmin means one who knows Brahman or spirit. One cannot be a Brahmin in name only. And just because one is born in a Brahmin family, if they don't actually cultivate the Brahminical lifestyle, then they're called Brahmabandhu, friend of a Brahmin, which is a kind of insult. It's like if someone was putting themselves forward as being a tradesman, and you say, oh, you're not a tradesman, you're just a friend of a tradesman. So say someone comes to do a job on your building, like a joinery job or something, and they do what you call a cowboy job of it, then you could call them, oh, you're just a friend of a joiner. So similarly, calling someone a Brahma Bandhu means, or a friend of a Brahmin, means that they're not actually qualified, that they just happen to be connected, either by birth or some other way. So it's not the prerequisite for being a Brahmin is not that you're born in a Brahmin family. Being born in a Brahmin family gives one the opportunity to be trained as a Brahmin, just like one gets initiated. First initiation, sometimes that's called Harinamanization, where you get the mantra given by your spiritual master, and you take your vows to follow the 4 regulative principles, chant minimum 16 rounds. So this is Harinam initiation, and before you get that, then you practice it for a certain period of time. You practice chanting the Mahamantra, chanting on bead 16 rounds a day for at least a year, and then following regulative principles as well. And then that is showing the spiritual master that we're serious about spiritual life, and then the spiritual master takes responsibility. So that responsibility that the spiritual master takes is that he takes your karma, the karma which we've accumulated, and that clears the path so that we can understand spiritual life easier, because our karma is such an obstacle for us. It blinds us to our spiritual nature, and it causes us to act simply by a conditioned habit. So the more we're serious about following the spiritual master, then the more that karma is actually removed, or the more we feel or experience the difference when we take initiation. So when the spiritual master gives some instruction for the serious disciple, that disciple takes it as their life and soul. And to have the proper relationship with the spiritual master is that we have more trust in that person than we have in ourselves. So that means that we have to check, is this spiritual master, this person who is considering to be my spiritual master, are they living the life according to the directions of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam? And can I trust them to the point where I'll trust them before I can trust myself? So because we have conditioned, we have a conditioned nature, then our senses are imperfect, then we can only come to a certain realization. We can only come to a certain conclusion of knowledge through our own sense perception and through speculation. So these are called Pratyaksha and Anumana, but Shabda Brahman or Pramana means that we accept direction coming from a higher source, and that higher source is going to help us arrive at a higher platform of knowledge. So we give that example, just like if someone wanted to be an electrician, for example, then you could read some books on it, but you're dealing with something which is very powerful and very dangerous if you misuse it. You know, for example, you may just happen to touch the wrong wire and get electrocuted. But if you're training under someone who tells you, do this, don't do that, then that person keeps you safe. So you would have trust, and that person knows more about working with electricity than you do. The person's been doing it for years. You get taught by someone else who's qualified, etc. So this is a parampara, and this was Prabhupada was mentioned as evam parampara praptam. So this science of devotional service is received through disciplic succession. It's not that someone just self-appointed and decided to call himself a guru. You cannot do that. You must be appointed by someone who's already coming in that succession, and then it's authorization. So it's just like, it's not like Krishna can just start printing up certificates just because we happen to have a photocopier, or printing money. See, we just think, well, okay, the Royal Mint is printing money, and we can just print money, who are they? We don't accept their authority. We're more authorized than they are. We're following Bhagavad Gita, so we're authorized. We can use this money in Krishna's service, so we'll just print money. And it won't stand up in the court, will it? They don't accept that authority. Similarly, the authority coming from the Supreme Lord is the representatives, Krishna's representatives, the spiritual master, chain of disciplic succession. And this is how Krishna wants us to approach him. So in Maharaj Rahugana, first of all, he misunderstood Jad Bharat to be a dullard. The word Jada means dull. Some translations it means dull, Jada. And at least in Bengali it does. And he just thought that Jad Bharat was just a dullard, some simple village idiot who couldn't even carry a palanquin without creating a disturbance. He didn't realise that Jad Bharat, in the corner of the palanquin he was carrying, was creating so much havoc because he was being careful not to stand on any ants. Because he's a self-realised soul, he understands that the soul is present in all living entities, not just in human form. So this is the true understanding of Brahman, is that we see the spirit soul in every living entity, not just in the humans. The active life force which animates the body is the same which animates all bodies, whether it be humans, animals, aquatics, plants, etc. And one who's on the Brahman platform can understand that the soul is present in all bodies, and therefore they don't restrict their religious principles simply to the human platform and exploit the animals and other living entities. So this understanding that I am Brahman is called Brahma Jigyasa, inquiry into the absolute truth. So there's this verse, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. So Atato means at this present moment. It means at this point in time we have a human form of life, and this is the best time to inquire about absolute truth. Why are we suffering? Why are we here? In the other forms of life, then they don't have that same capability. They experience suffering, they experience temporary happiness and distress, but they don't have the ability to question and to make advancement of their own accord. And we see that actually, because this Maharaj Rahugana actually was a Raj Rishi, when he heard Jad Bharat speak, then he understood this is not a fool, this is a great self-realised soul, and I misunderstood him to be just some village idiot because he is so renounced. He didn't care for any residence, he didn't care for his external appearance, he had no attachment to vanity or social standing. Of course, these things cannot be imitated. Well, you could imitate it, but it won't bring you to the same realisation. At previous births, Jad Bharat was actually a great king himself, Bharat Maharaj, and actually India is named after Bharat. The Indians generally don't call India India. To us they call it, but to themselves they call it Bharat or Bharatavarsh. And it's interesting actually, this Maharaja Rahugana says that he was the king of 2 states. Can anyone remember what they were? It was Sindhu and Sauvira, was it?
Yeah.
Is that right? Couldn't find it. So this the people of India are commonly known as Hindus because they were referred to by outsiders as Hindus because they lived on the other side of the Indus Valley, and so they pronounced it Hindu, and it just stuck. But actually there is no such thing as Hindu. The religion which Hindus follow is not called Hinduism, it's called Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan means eternal and Dharma means the occupation or function or nature. So it refers to our eternal nature, and therefore it's not sectarian. So this eternal nature, wherever people find the truth, then they can brings them closer to the truth of their own existence and the relationship with the Supreme Being, and understanding what is this world, what's its function, where do we really belong. So that is called Sanatana Dharma. However it's dressed. And Krishna will incarnate in many different places and different times in order to continue to present this Sanatana Dharma in whichever way it's possible for the people to hear. And when Maharaj Rahugana heard Jad Bharat speak, then he could understand that this person has a very high level of spiritual realization, much more so than I do. So because Maharaj Rahugana was a saintly king, he could recognize that. Whereas someone who's not, they say that if you give an angry person good advice, they become even more angry. It's like if someone's really upset and you tell them, calm down, then that usually makes them worse. What do you mean, calm down? I'm already calm. So that happens. So sometimes the best thing to do is just to remain quiet until things boil over a bit. So although Maharaj Rahugana was upset with Jad Bharat, because he also was a saintly king, even though he was chastising Jad Bharat sarcastically with his instructions, because he was a saintly king, then he didn't become angry when he heard the good advice. He became regretful that he had treated him in such a way, and immediately he got down off the palanquin. So to the ordinary people, he was allowing himself to be worshipped as a king because the people will follow the king, and when the king sets a good example, then the people follow that good example. Unlike nowadays, leaders of society, it's very rare to find someone who's got some very solid principles and who's not sold out. But he was, although he was setting the example and allowed himself to be worshipped just like a god, he didn't consider himself to be God. He wasn't proud. He wasn't intoxicated by that opulence and reputation, etc. Because as soon as he heard some instruction from Jad Bharat, some spiritual knowledge, he immediately got down and he paid his obeisances and he put his head to his feet. So the head is the topmost part of your body and the feet is the lowest part. So he was basically putting himself that my topmost is less than your lowermost. So this is when someone says, I take the dust from your feet, it means that I hold you in high regard. So this is the Vedic culture. It cultivates respect for elders, respect for people in knowledge, respect for all living entities. Just like even you would respect a tiger. How would you respect a tiger? Would you go up to it and say, "My dear tiger, please accept my humble obeisances"? How would you respect a tiger, Felix? From a great distance, yeah. Exactly. We respect it's very powerful, that it would kill us, so let's keep out of the way. So as soon as he heard Jadbharat speaking, and he realised he'd been disrespectful to a great person, a great saintly person, and immediately he wanted to be forgiven. So sometimes that's what happens in our day-to-day life, that we transgress or we misbehave with each other. And that's why in the temple, every morning we offer respectful obeisances to the Vaishnavas, Vanchakalpa, Tribhuscha, Kripasnubhi Eva Cha, Patidnam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. And we offer respectful obeisances to all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are just like desire trees and fulfill the desires of all the fallen conditioned souls. So just in case we've made some offence that we didn't realise, then when we offer it, it's not just like we rattle out some mantra that we learned, because you may as well just chant, any old thing. If it's not going to be done consciously, it should be done consciously. So when we're chanting it, we mean it. When we recite the 10 offences against the holy name, then we become conscious. We're conscious when we're saying it, because we mean it. And if we don't mean it, then we become conscious, then it will start to bring meaning. I think it was in the Bible, it was meaningless repetition is condemned. So that doesn't mean to say repetition is condemned, but meaningless repetition, because then it becomes just a meaningless ritual, isn't it? Ritualism doesn't really serve a great purpose. Krishna consciousness means to be conscious of Krishna, not just to be a ritualistic performer. And to become conscious of Krishna, Prabhupada says, first we must become conscious. So that's a big struggle in Kali Yuga, because the modes of passion and ignorance are very strong upon us. Even just to be materially conscious is very difficult. So we have to make the best use of a bad bargain. One devotee said to Prabhupada that before we joined, we used to take so much intoxication, and we did this and we did that, and we kind of wasted ourselves. And Prabhupada just says, well, just make the best use of a bad bargain. So whatever our situation is, don't get too much caught up in any of our shortcomings, but just focus on the opportunities that we have so that we can make the best use of a bad bargain. This body is a bad bargain, although it's sometimes said to be a great benediction because it affords us self-realization. But it's also considered a bad bargain because as soon as you've got a body, then you have a certain time limit where you've got a certain time limit where you're going to inhabit that body. And we have various challenges in life as well. We want to enjoy it all the time, but sometimes we have to suffer, we're forced to suffer. And Prabhupada says that an intelligent person doesn't like to suffer. And Krishna explains that a person who's intelligent will seek out the sources of misery and eradicate those sources. So sometimes the very thing which we're attached to give us pleasure is the thing which will give us the opposite. And therefore it's important that we can understand the basic principle of how karma works. And Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, don't try to understand the intricacies of action and reaction. Like sometimes you may jam your finger in the door and think, oh, what did I do to deserve that? Maybe it's because I spoke harshly to this person earlier on today. It's not necessarily going to be the fact. Because karma, it could be something you did many births ago, which caused us to be inattentive. So we don't know what's causing it, but simply if we tolerate, so tolerate means that we know it's got a beginning and it's got an end. So this is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita 2:14. Anybody know that verse? The rest was sense perception. Exactly, yeah. Near enough. Yeah, so the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and the disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So, of course, that doesn't mean to just say that we grit our teeth when we're in misery, and then if we're in happiness, instead of enjoying that happiness, then we just forcefully put on a miserable face. It means that we just remember that just like the winter, summer seasons, they have a start. Just like now, winter is going and spring is coming, and hopefully summer. But we know also that summer will finish, winter will start again, and winter will finish and summer will start again. So we don't become too attached. Because, so similarly with happiness and distress, if we become too averse to our distress and too attached to our happiness, then it simply means that we become similarly affected by both. So just bearing in mind that everything passes in due course, and we just continue with our devotional service, and in due course of time, because we're not accumulating any further karma and we're becoming purified of our past karma, then all that will be left is eternal bliss and knowledge. And this is the responsibility of the great saintly persons. So Maharaj Rahugana, he was that type of person, that he would make sure that people were doing according to spiritual principles for the gradual elevation to self-realization. So he was very, although he was remorseful that he'd mistreated Jad Bharat, he was actually very enlivened to hear such talks, because people who are responsible leaders of society, when they hear from great sages, then these great sages give them instructions which relieve their burden. So the Kshatriyas in the social body are considered to be the arms, and the Brahmins are the head. So just like your head or your brain will tell you, will make up its mind what to do, and it will give some instruction, and the arms will do something. So similarly, the leaders of society, they're supposed to take instruction from intelligent class, and by intelligent class we don't just mean someone who's read a lot of books and has been at university. Now that's okay, but intelligent means spiritual intelligent, able to discriminate between spirit and matter, between right and wrong. And this is the reference point. Otherwise, in government or in any kind of leadership, if there's no reference point for right and wrong, then everything is just vox populi, whatever people want. If everybody wants this, even if it's wrong, just give them it. And who's considering about the reaction, who's considering about either karmic reaction or any other type of reaction which might be there. So it's very short-sighted, this vox populi thing. It's very short-sighted. It's not considering what's good for people. So just like a good parent, sometimes they have to say no to the children because it's good for the child to know when is no and when is yes. And the prajas, or the children, or the subjects of the leaders of society, they're like the children, and the leader is responsible for his children. And therefore they have to say, yes, you all want this, but no, it's not good, and this is why it's not good. And in due course, this will be the result of this. So if you do what's good, then just in due course. It's like sometimes the government want to impose some austerities upon the citizens, and that's not a bad thing. Because people are so accustomed to simply wanton sense gratification, then they can't tolerate any austerities. They're not cultivated like that. And simply because the leaders themselves, they have some motivation for their own personal gain, therefore they don't really care what is right and what's wrong and what's going to benefit the citizens and what's not going to benefit them. And not only the human citizens, but all the living entities are known as the praja, or the citizens of the king or the queen or the state. And he's responsible for all of them, not just for the humans. Okay, so we'll just stop there. If anyone's got any questions or comments, to talk to you.
You were mentioning about the Vox Populi, so because predominantly the massacres are Shudra, so is it not possible to have a good leader, to have a good leadership system if there's democracy? Because the democracy will mean that most of it will be Shudra vote, which will outweigh anything else.
Whether it's democracy or whether it's autocracy, the main thing is the leader has to be qualified. If one says, okay, democracy is not working, then let's appoint a king through a hereditary system or something like that. Then the person who's leading still has to be qualified. Unfortunately, because people have been misguided for so long, then they don't trust leaders, and they may not even recognise qualifications when they see it, because it would be against so many of the things which they want in life. So they've been misled down the road for so long, round the garden path, round the shed, and they got lost in the bushes round the back, and then they come out and they don't know which way to go. So it's actually mentioned in the scriptures that even Paramahamsas are bewildered in Kali Yuga. So to speak of some mandate leaders, Kali Yuga is such a confusing time. So therefore, simply just this chanting of a Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So to try to sort everything out, it's so confused, it's been going on for so long, that it would have to take some massive agreement with everybody. Everybody would have to be on the brink of disaster. And even if they are on the brink of disaster, they're still hoping that they can just go back to normal, just like the beginning of the pandemic and lockdown, and people were thinking, oh, perhaps things will be better when things go back to normal. But for many people, they just wanted to go back to normal without any change, and they're quite happy to forget about anything and not learn any lesson, and having had a lockdown, not considering that perhaps this is happening because we are contravening the laws of nature. Some people will get that message, they'll think this is nature saying I've had enough, just like my own mother was saying that she had this feeling that nature's saying, you know, we've had enough, you've abused us so long, and this is just a little warning in one sense. And that's the way it works. When we try to lord it over material nature, then we simply become entangled in the complexities of action and reaction, because we cannot conquer over material nature. It's far too powerful. But if people chant Hare Krishna, then the consciousness will become purified, their life will become auspicious, and automatically they'll start to lose the taste for some of the degrading lifestyles they have, and they'll start to become attracted to a better lifestyle, more in the mode of goodness, and then that'll awaken their consciousness to start asking questions like, who am I, why am I here, how can I be benefited, what's the real purpose of life? So that's why Lord Chaitanya, when he brought the Maha Mantra, he was, Bhagavatam Thakur says, Jeev Jai will wake up sleeping souls. And he's giving the Maha Mantra, the transcendental alarm clock. Anything else?
So, is the system flawed because until you establish Varnashram, then the vote is given to everybody. So with Varnashram, I think if they're voting for a leader, it wouldn't be left to everybody to have their opinion be the Brahmins, wouldn't it, that would elect the leaders?
Varnashram is already there in one sense. It's just it's like we already have the 4 orders in life. People are naturally attracted, but because people are disqualified, so if people become more qualified, then they become better at what they're at. So if the Sudras, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins who are in society nowadays already, who are just in a spiritually comatose state, spiritually sleeping, then they won't know, like those who are guiding, for example, just now, who are the Brahmins in society, is the educators and the scientists. These are the main Brahmins. Not too much philosophy. And the Kshatriyas are government leaders and sometimes some royal personalities. And because people are corrupt, then sometimes the Vaishyas are controlling the Kshatriyas because money talks. So the Vaishyas, they pay lots of money to Kshatriyas in order to turn a blind eye or make a certain law so that business can go in a certain way. And then most people are simply ignorant or innocent, and they just have to go along with it. They have very little control to do much about it. But the more because it actually can work against them, their own kind of vox populi and democracy can work against the demons in such a way. When I say demons, I mean those who simply want to exploit the resources of material nature for their own ends. It will work against them because as more of the general people become awakened, because the nature of the leaders is that they pander to the demands of the people. So if the demands of the people becomes a different demand, then they'll have to step their game up as well. And those who are smart enough will take advantage of that and become spiritually inclined as well. So these 4 orders were set up by Krishna, the divine orders. They always exist. There's always someone who's going to take the point of a leader, someone who's going to tell them, be an advisor for them, someone who just wants to make money. Even some people just love making money, they don't even care about spending it. They just love that that rasa. And then other people are quite happy simply just to have a paid job, 9 to 5. Even some people who were managers of companies, they just give it up to get a job working under someone else because the stress is too much. Or some people, they're happy to do that because it gives them a certain amount of freedom. Anything else you'd like to add to them?
It's a nice point that the vox populi have been purified, and then they want to, elect a leader who wants to fulfill, better policies than us. So by prashadam and book distribution, different ways we can purify the general masses, and then it'll upgrade their level of discrimination so they can elect a better leader.
So the members of ISKCON, the task which they're assigned is that we simply take this chanting to people, and it's not that we're going to purify, that we're going to change people, but the chanting will. Krishna's present in his holy name, so when Krishna enters into people's hearts through the holy name, or enters into their stomach through prasadam, or into the brain through the books, or speaking with the devotee, then people's consciousness will become changed for the better, and they'll start to think more about what is the better benefit, rather than just how much can I put in the bank. And then they start to realise, well, what's all this for? What's all this about? And the fact that people are considering the state of the planet and government levels is also a good thing. The fact that many people are compassionate towards the animals through veganism and vegetarianism, then this is all a good thing. It's all the results of people becoming more purified. And so the more that we, as devotees, try to propagate this Krishna consciousness, the more purification of the atmosphere, and people become elevated in their way of thinking, and then it'll be unthinkable for them to act in deplorable ways in due course of time. And as more people think like that, then that's going to have an effect, a knock-on effect. So just like nowadays, many people in businesses are actually realising that in order to remain in business, they have to change their modus operandi to be a green business. Otherwise, they're going to get left behind. So even though they're greedy, they're being dragged along to improve. And this is just the beginning of it. It's to at least take care of the place that you live in. That's Brahminical as well, isn't it? Otherwise it's mode of ignorance. We just take something out of the earth, leave a whole mess, and leave the water and all that poisoned and things like that. It's just Tana's doom, destruction, ugra karma, horrible, unbeneficial work meant for the destruction. So there are some good signs there, and I think it's like when people become awake, then they don't have they become awake to some kind of cheating, or they become awake to some situation, then they can't go back to the way of life they were before. It's too uncomfortable. One in knowledge suffers twice as much because they're aware that what they're doing is wrong. So just people changing their habits is a bit of a challenge, but at least if the awakening is there. Okay, I think if there's nothing else, we just finish there. Stronger in the key.
Jai. Prabhupada Prana